Welcome back to another episode of the D-League. Today, Bilal and I will be talking about racing games in episode 23. And concerning racing games, the gameplay is pretty the gameplay is pretty simple in general. You are driving a vehicle through a track, and the target is to get the fastest time or to beat the other opponents, and that's pretty much it. But there are two different kinds of racing games, and one is the simulation racing games, which are based on real cars, real tracks, and that try to mimic real life physics. For example, if the track is wet from rain, then your tires lose grip, so the feel is different than driving on a normal, let's say, just cloudy day. And then on the other hand, you have arcade racing games that use more unrealistic vehicles like jets or hover cars maybe, and they can use things like weapons, for example rockets or maybe some slime to slow down other cars, and so you get an advantage through that. And they also use or they can use unrealistic physics. For example, your car can jump without a bumper or without a ramp, or maybe something like you can make turns where a normal car would actually flip if it was real life. And in these games, it's just that you can do it, and they are not that realistic. And I think the current trend is more towards the simulation genre, and we have some still very popular arcade-style titles, but we're going to talk about that later. So, as a racing game player, I think I'll start with the expectations real quick. Then Bilal can join with his opinion. Sorry, Bilal.
No, fine.
Anyway, so as a player, you probably expect when you start a game that you can choose from different tracks and different cars that play differently. For example, you have a car that accelerates the fastest, but maybe has the lowest maximum speed, and then you have a car that's the complete opposite, or some cars that are more difficult to maneuver. Maybe they don't turn that quickly, so they are not that responsive. And so I mean, that's the core gameplay, right? It's all about the tracks and the vehicles that you can choose from. So you expect some variety as a player. And then, of course, also you probably expect something like not necessarily practice mode, but something where you just choose your track and your car, and then you drive that track. But also something like a tour mode that kind of functions as the story mode in racing games. Or what would be your expectation when you start up a racing game? What options would you expect that you can choose from, Bilal?
So I think, I mean, obviously the main expectation is to switch between different cars, like before you start a match. Like, I think every racing game has some sort of like picking a car. Like if it's Mario Kart, then it's picking a character and a car, but like something like Forza, you actually pick a car specifically. So like like you said, different kind of stats depending on what you're playing as is, I think, my main expectation. And then, like, I guess the other stuff is kind of standard. Also, kind of like what you said with like a simple kind of design where you play a track and then it plays out like normal racing where you have laps and then whoever finishes first is the winner. Yeah, I mean, beyond that, everything else is kind of an additional, or some kind of addition, like to that certain game, or like a twist on the genre.
Yeah, I think so as well. That some games, they live, for example, from the multiplayer experience. Maybe they are not like, they don't have a tour mode. For example, I think, what was it? Trackmania Nations, which was just online play. I mean, you could practice on your own, but the main point was that you start playing, let's say, with 10 other players on the same track, and then you go for the fastest round, and you cannot actually interact with each other, but you can see the cars of the other players.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what the game was all about. But then you have games like Gran Turismo, where you start with like a very basic car, maybe something like a Volkswagen Polo or a Mitsubishi Colt, something like that, a really small car, and then you need to do driver licenses first, and then you do races with like these normal cars, and then in the end you have enough money to buy rally cars or these touring cars, and that's kind of the progression in the story mode or tour mode. Then on the other hand, like you said, Super Mario Kart is something different, where you just pick your character and then you drive. And I mean, you have some unlocks, but it's not like you go from that cheap Volkswagen car to a rally car. It's just that instead of Mario, you unlock Luigi, something like that. Yeah. So it's more just kind of a guided. It's not very story mode-ish, right? There's not much progression. It's just a track list that is called Star Cup. So like these 5 tracks are Star Cup, or the tracks just get more difficult, more complex. But you can always play the same car and you're not at a disadvantage. So I think that's kind of also one of the differences that you might run into when booting up different racing games, where maybe the selection is more limited than in another racing game, where maybe all cars or all characters are unlocked right from the start. And from my experience, like the difficulty, if we talk about simulation and arcade style racing games, then at least my impression was that arcade style games are easier to get into than simulation games, because like I said, you can do turns that don't work in real life, where you would lose control of your car, or maybe you don't have to be, let's say, an experienced driver to know how to play, kind of, that you let's say you need to brake. If you take a turn to the right, then you brake and you hold on the right side, so you drift more outwards in the corner when you take the turn.
Mm-hmm.
And when you play Mario Kart, you're just like, yeah, I just hold right. And maybe use a turbo mushroom if I bump into the wall, and then yeah, it's fine. Stuff like that. They are less punishing, I think. But maybe that's just my experience. What's your opinion on that? Do you also agree that arcade games might be easier?
Yeah, I mean, I've mainly played arcade racing games. I have played Trackmania Nations. I actually forgot about that game, but I remember it was very fun, and it was cool that you could make tracks. But anyway, I mean, but yeah, if you compare the more simulation games to the arcade ones, I mean, the simulation ones are trying to be realistic. And in real life, if you drive a very fast car improperly, then it's very punishing. Like, it's not exactly easy to recover from a bad turn or like bumping into something. Whereas, and even those games that like they stay like, some of the more realistic simulations will just pretend that the cars don't like get broken when they hit a wall.
Yeah, exactly.
so they're not like full on realistic, but they understand like if you smash a car into a wall, you're not just gonna start driving again immediately. so I think like that's a big aspect as to why like simulations might seem harder. I think that they are like certainly the ones that try to be more realistic, I've had a more difficult experience in. I have a friend who played a lot of Forza, and he was like, "Hey, we should play this game." And I'm not a big racing game player, but when I tried that, like it was pretty hard in comparison because you actually have to make all the right turns, and you have to like use all the right car handling and all that. I mean, obviously there are more technical terms, but in that game, like you can if you play, you're going to start out very bad, whereas something like I mean if you consider it a racing game, the one that I played the most was Kirby Air Ride back when the GameCube was big, and that game it was a lot easier. Actually, you only really needed technically one button to play it because it would like kind of change depending on the context. So I mean, I think like a lot of the arcade ones, they are easier, like you said. But I think if they tried, obviously they could be harder. But I think it's just kind of the stigma of like realism versus arcade. Like they kind of just don't make them harder. And I think, like I said, the simulations kind of end up harder by default because of that attempt to like simulate realism.
Yeah, exactly. I think that summarizes it very well. And I think the reason for arcade games being easier is probably that, well, when you think arcade, it's somebody that throws in like 50 cents or maybe $1 and has a go at the game. And if it's frustrating, like right from the start, then you won't play it again, right? Or if you play Super Mario Kart, it's something where you just give your friend the controller and you say, "Yeah, let's play some Mario Kart."
Yeah,
and it's just. I mean, the recent Mario Kart games have become more complex or have more items, and so there's more stuff you can learn. But if you go all the way back to the Super Nintendo Mario Kart, it was just gas, brake, and item. That's it. It's just 3 buttons. And of course, the input was always digital. So if you press right or left, it's on or off. It's like turning left or not turning left. While in a simulation game, I know that if you really go in depth in those games, you use a steering wheel because you can use the steering wheel to steer more precisely because it's like analog. I mean, if you steer a car in real life, then it's not left or right, but it's like a few degrees to the right or a few degrees to the left, or a really hard turn to the right, stuff like that. And that's, let's say, maybe the requirements to play a simulation game as a real simulation might be higher than arcade, because you would need to, for example, for gas and brakes, you would need to use analog buttons at least. So I guess today it's not that much of a problem because PlayStation controllers are analog, like the R2 and L2. Shoulder buttons are analog, so you could say one is gas and the other is brake. But then, a small analog stick might not be as precise, or it will be difficult to be as precise as with a steering wheel.
Yeah.
And because from my experience, the graphics are much more how should I say, much more demanding concerning hardware, like the hardware you're using. I think simulation racing games are mostly single player, right? Or you would need your own computer or your own console to play with a friend, because they don't really support split screen anymore, right?
I don't know which one of the Forzas I played like a few years ago had split screen, and I'm assuming the new ones would have it too.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know in general, but yeah, I know like probably like things obviously for portable would definitely need their own, but
at least like if you want to have a good experience, then you probably use your own setup.
Yeah.
Because even if you use split screen, then your field of view is different, and maybe it's not that much fun as a player if you can only see half of the screen. But I think that's also like one of the differences in like just accessibility, where arcade games, they are more simple from the control layout in general as well.
Yeah.
So else when it comes to simulation games, they can be quite complex today, I think. I mean, even if you take a look at games like the old Gran Turismo games, so even PlayStation 1, you had this customization and upgrades. For example, you could switch your tires, or you could switch your motor, and you could switch other components. And I think today the simulation games are also more about customizing as well, where you don't just change the color, but maybe you can also change like the chassis a bit. I don't know if it affects the gameplay in the recent games, because I haven't really followed racing games that much. I know which games are the popular series. I guess Gran Turismo is still kind of that way. where you buy a car and then you can upgrade it to make it better. But do you know if in Forza you can like change parts to make the car go faster and stuff like that?
I don't think so. I think Forza worked. I know the one that I played worked by just picking like real life model cars, and there was like they had stats like obviously designed after the real cars. But I don't think you could switch anything out.
Okay. Yeah, okay, that also kind of explains why you have DLC cars where you have to pay money to get a faster car. So that could be kind of pay to win
Yeah.
in that case. But yeah, I think if it's just visuals, I think it's fine. Or if you can unlock the stuff offline, where I think in the old Gran Turismo games you had different levels of upgrades. So in the end, everyone would kind of use the same car anyway. So in that case, it's just a bit more progress that you have as a player. But yeah, pay to win cars DLC is a bit. At least for me, it's a turnoff as a player. I wouldn't want to buy a game for $60 and then I have to pay another 30 to get a few new cars that are better than the built-in cars, let's say.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the ones in Forza they were unlocked, or I don't think. Oh well, yeah, the Forza that I played like it was kind of before the whole like big free to play era. It was when free to play was kind of coming out, so that one didn't really have any DLC, and I don't know if any of the new ones do. But I mean, they probably do, considering it's a AAA game. But like back then, I think they had all the cars unlocked, or like you could get them through playing the game.
Yeah, I think it was the most recent Forza game where fans were really upset because cars were either very difficult to unlock, or you needed a lot of in-game currency to unlock them. So you had to play for a lot of hours, or you could buy them for like $10 for one car. And that's kind of, a bit overpriced. So people were really upset about this mechanic, let's say.
Yeah.
So I guess as a player, of course, when you buy a racing game, or when you want to buy a racing game, then like we said, cars and tracks are the main component of the racing game. And well, as a player, you always have to decide if the game has DLC, if you want to support that. And let's say if it's in your price range, or if you think they are just trying to cash grab real hard on from the fans.
Yeah, I think we could do a future episode on like pay to win, but I think obviously like the business idea is kind of like I think they find it like hard to justify within the company to not do it because it's kind of working for other people. But ultimately, it might cause like some big problems if people don't avoid it anyway. So.
So now that we kind of talked a bit about simulation, I mean, if you talk about simulation racing games, it's very much just imagine driving a car in real life. Or if you drive a car in real life, then I guess it's a good starting point what you can expect as a player when you try to drive a car in a simulation racing game. Of course, you have stuff like, you get on the grass, then you lose grip, then your car spins around, and like you said, and I think in most racing games you don't have a damage model, where if you crash into a wall, then yeah, your car is still fine, or maybe it has a few scratches, but it's not like you died in a car accident. You can just continue driving.
Yeah.
I guess it's also, if it's a licensed title where you, let's say, have a Ferrari or a Porsche, where the companies don't want to see a cube of Porsche scrap metal that was a car. So it's also, I think that the
Conspiracy.
companies just.
I said a conspiracy to make the cars look better.
Maybe. Yeah. So yeah, I guess because simulation games try to be real, then yeah, just imagine if you've watched real racing, like touring racing or Formula One, then you kind of know what to expect. While on the other hand, if we talk about arcade style games, we talked a bit about Mario Kart, which is, well, go-karts, or in the recent versions, you also have bikes to choose from. And yeah, I mean, the game is all about the crazy tracks, like Bowser's Castle with lava that you can fall into, and like fire that hurts you, and all the crazy items like the Koopa shells, like the green, red, and blue one that you try to hit other people with, so you slow them down, or you have the mushroom to go faster, or the star that you can activate that makes you go faster, and you can just crash into people to make them spin. Stuff like that, right? I mean, that's that. You don't use a turtle shell in real life, and you don't throw it at cars. So I guess that's kind of the appeal in this case, to have something that's unrealistic but just fun to play, where you can be, in this case, kind of an asshole as well. So maybe you just have fun shooting stuff at other people and make their day worse. And maybe that's just fun to you. But then you also have games that don't have like weapons, but are also unrealistic. Stuff like F-Zero or Sonic All-Star Racing has items. Like F-Zero, or on the PlayStation I played Demolition Racer, that is also, my guess, more unrealistic. Where it's all about driving fast, and you don't have items to slow other people down, so it's, let's say, a more honest racing game. But like in F-Zero, you can go in I think GX, it goes up to 3,000 kilometers per hour, and yeah, so like the car speed is over the top, and in some tracks you don't drive normally, but you are what is it, like you're hanging on the bottom side of the track, so you're driving upside down. Yeah, stuff like that. And then you have some crazy jumps, or like low gravity parts where you can actually drop off the you drop off the racetrack and kind of die, or you get disqualified. In this case, you just lose the race. And yeah, that's just more, let's say, crazy. It's just like a game design where you try something new, something that you cannot get in real life.
Yeah.
No. What, or is there like a racing game that where like an arcade style game where you say, yeah, that's completely different from just going fast or using weapons?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kirby Air Ride's kind of it's like interesting because it has very simple racing mechanics, but it
Hmm.
but it was I don't know, you like had to actually I think outplay people because so here I mean I'll just like say how it works. I mean you kind of used I think your player moved automatically and you would just use like analog stick to turn
Hmm.
and then this the A button would either interact with things or you could hold it down to charge. So like if there's a speed boost on the ground, you hit your A button and then yeah, it'll shoot you forward. But then if you hold down your A button, then like your character will stay in place and just kind of charge. And then if you let go, then you kind of do a full burst. Um,
Hmm.
and so in oh yeah, and you also had I think if you like shook the analog stick or something like that, I can't remember. Then your character would like spin and you could damage other guys, or you
Hmm.
could kill because like in Kirby you swallow guys and like get their abilities. So like
Hmm.
you could kill enemies and then you'd get one of their abilities, like not enemy players but like NPCs. And then if you did your controller shake, then you'd be able to attack, use their attack. So like I think one of them was like this plasma thing, so you could like charge it up by moving and then burst it on another player. And so during a racing match, you could actually just knock out players by killing them, and not even have to like only race. And so like I think technically you could knock out all other players, but it's
Hmm.
very difficult to do. I don't think I've ever done that before,
Yeah.
but I've killed other players, which is pretty fun. Um,
Hmm.
so but yeah, I mean, it was kind of it's strange because like it's a racing game, but they really like added non-racing components to
Hmm.
it, so it feels kind of like a light Kirby game, but like with racing. so
Okay.
yeah, it's kind of interesting in that regard. I mean, like
Where
it's
it's
kind
not just going fast, but well, you can kind of influence it a bit, but
yeah.
it's more on rail racing kind of.
Yeah, like you kind of just go with the track and then you can do
Hmm.
other stuff. And then there were a lot of like shortcuts that if you were good, then you could like beat your old records if you did everything perfectly and like hit like all the right stuff. So there were and like
Hmm.
sometimes they would close off. Like sometimes the secret things would open or they would close off and you'd have to like hit the right button to activate something. So so you actually had to play correctly and not just handle correctly.
Okay,
Um,
yeah, I see.
yeah, and so I mean, it's kind of like Mario Kart in that regard, where like okay, you race and then you fuck with other players, but it felt I haven't played much Mario Kart. I think I only played it like once because it never really interested me. But I think it's kind of like Mario Kart, but like a little more, a little bit
Simple.
less of racing, like a little
Hmm.
more like other stuff, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, I think like when it comes to Mario Kart, the game kind of makes you think it's simple, but now you have, or I think even in Mario Kart 64, you know, even from the first and from the first game, you want to drift and to build up speed. And in the recent games, you get a real speed boost after drifting. So,
Mm.
like the good players, they take the turns correctly and also drift to get the speed bonus. And so there's a lot of stuff where you can just improve your driving
Hmm.
um, in Mario Kart, and that also kind of sets apart the newbie from the pro. Let's say where the pro is just better at drifting. He picks the best character, he picks the best vehicle, and just maybe doesn't use his favorite car and character because they're a bit slower. and yeah, he just knows everything inside out. All the, like you said, some shortcuts, and I think that's also kind of one thing that makes a game like Mario Kart fun to play for a longer time, because even if it makes you think you're maybe good or you're driving fast, there's still stuff you can learn, and maybe when playing online, you notice, okay, though everyone is playing Funky Kong, maybe Funky Kong is the best character, and then maybe you then you know, okay, he really is the fastest character. In that case, you optimize your character choice, and but then maybe you learn shortcuts that you didn't know about, and then you just have fun practicing getting that shortcut right and things like that. Also, one thing I just remembered, I mentioned Demolition Racer, and that game did something pretty interesting where you didn't win by being the fastest, but by having the most points. Like you get points for making other people spin or like killing them. You could ram people, like you had health points, and if the car took that much damage, then it just exploded and you lost, or you just killed the enemy. And in that case, the first place, like the ranking, who finished first to last, the point multiplier was just different. Like the first place, I think, got times 20, and then the second place got time 15. So if you are second place, but you got a lot of points because maybe you killed some cars or you made them spin, and the first place just went fast all the time and couldn't get points because it didn't have any car to ram and stuff, then you would still win. So yeah, in that case, that's kind of an interesting system where the game it makes you want to go fast to get the best multiplier, but sometimes you just stand around and you wait for other cars to drive by, so you could actually get some points that you use with your multiplier. So in the first rounds, you just crash into everything to get points, and well, kind of lose health points. And then in the last rounds, you go fast to get first place and to not die in the bulk of the other cars. And the game was very fast, and yeah, I really enjoyed that game.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a bit. It's kind of funny how the game makes you go slow, but also makes you want to go fast. Nice change of pace from just going fast. I mean, even in Super Mario Kart, it's about going fast and having item luck, so you can go faster or make people go slower.
Yeah.
All right. So, what do you think, as a player, what's the appeal of a racing game? What do you think, before we switch to the developer perspective, what do you think is like the reason why you keep playing racing games?
Well, I think for me, I think that like a more realistic one would be because of like wanting to try out like a bunch of different cars because they look cool, and I don't know, it's interesting, and I mean racing games are fast, so if you like fast games, that's probably another part of it. And I mean, some
Hmm.
like people are actually interested in like track driving, but maybe you can't like actually go to the track every single day. So you try, I don't know, some game like Forza or something else that's kind of realistic. Um,
Hmm.
so kind of for the, I don't know, attractiveness of the game, I guess, in terms of like look and feel and like
Yeah.
speed. Um, and I think in terms of arcade, it's kind of like I mean, Kirby Air Ride had tons of different modes. So like I played that game because there were like you could do a demolition derby kind of thing. There were a bunch of different stars you could ride. I mean, like there were, yeah, a lot of the mini games were cool because you had boss battles, and you had like sometimes you had drag racing where you'd pick like drag racing stars. So I think like for me, like sometimes an arcade game can just be a fun game and not necessarily like have that many racing aspects or the attractiveness between like how real cars might look cool. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess fun. And in terms of like keep playing, Kirby Air Ride had a lot of progression aspects, like in achievements. So like there was a board where if you got an achievement, like it would expose achievements next to it, and then you'd know what to try to do to get that achievement. And sometimes achievements could get you an unlock, like a different colored Kirby or a different star. So aspects like, yeah, like achievements or unlocking new things, like in terms of like Forza, maybe unlocking new cars, um,
Hmm.
that kind of thing would keep you playing, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think that some people also just enjoy the competition
Hmm.
where they want to just race against other people or maybe break some records,
Uh-huh.
maybe like be the best in your group,
Hmm.
or you say, yeah, I'm just better than all my friends, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, if you compare it to real racing, you can drive much more recklessly. At
Hmm.
least
Yeah.
I enjoyed, let's say in Gran Turismo, if there was a turn and I saw some car in front of me and I would need to brake, I would just ram into it to slow myself down and just kick it off the track,
Hmm.
stuff like that. So that's you, for me. It was fun to just be a bit more creative in that case,
Yeah.
where yeah, you in real life you couldn't just, let's say you have a touring race, you don't have people just ramming into each other at like 300 kilometers an hour
Yeah.
because that's very risky. But in Gran Turismo, yeah, you just slow down, it's fine.
Hmm.
Yeah, kind of like that. Uh, and I think other people probably enjoy that as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I mean, there are some games that are kind of like focused around that. Like I know that Burnout has a reputation for like ramming into each other and destroying cars. And actually, we talked about
Hmm.
like kind of damaging cars and like how a lot of times the games don't have them. But yeah, Burnout is an example where it does exist, and I think in Forza Motorsport you would, if you crashed into things, like I think your components could get damaged. So like if
Hmm.
your engine could get damaged, then you drive at like a very very low speed, so you may as well just like surrender at that point. Um,
Hmm.
so so I know that, yeah, some of the realistic ones have interesting like damage systems.
Yeah, I remember Destruction Derby, and another pretty old racing game. You
Uh-huh.
also had like an image of your car, and you had like
Mm.
a health. It, it would show the health of your wheels or like your front or your back. And for example, if you lost your front right tire, then well, you you would always turn right because you would tilt to the right.
Yeah.
Because you only have a wheel on the left side. So, or you could lose both your wheels, your turning wheels, and then you're kind of tough luck. You're just out of luck in that case. So, I guess some games just play with the damaging factor as well. Okay, then let's talk about racing games as a developer. I mean, like the main concept of a racing game is to make a dot, or in this case, a vehicle, move along a track, fun to play, right? You could say you have, let's say, a circle and you have a dot, and the racing game would be just moving the dot around the circle. And in this case, you play Mario in a go-kart with mushrooms and Koopa shells, or you play a Ferrari or some Lamborghini car, whatever. And so you could make it really boring to play, where it's just go around the track. And as a developer, you kind of take that that really basic concept and want to make it interesting. For me, if I had to develop a racing game, then the first thing you would kind of set is the setting, right? Is it an off-road game? Is it a rally game? Is it a touring racing game? Is it let's say, something like Formula One? Because that also influences which cars you will use, or kind of how you use your physics, or how relevant some physics are.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have an off-road or a rally game, then jumping physics are important. While if you play Formula One, okay, there are no jumps, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Or if you want to go with a futuristic thing like F-Zero, or you want to do something completely different, like a Mario Kart, where you just go, maybe you play a dinosaur, or you play something like King Kong, or a robot. It's like a robot racing game, stuff like that. And with that idea, you also kind of set the speed of the game, right? I mean, a Formula One car is going faster than a rally car, but maybe that, like an F-Zero car goes 3,000 kilometers an hour compared to 400, 500 from a Formula One car. I think that's kind of the first step to take, to just think about, okay, what do I actually want to do? What do I want to create as a racing game?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the setting kind of precedes everything else, because then you have now you can choose what your tracks are going to be on, and like what they might look like, and what cars you'd have, and like how you expect like a track to play out, and what kind of experience you want the players to have when they're racing.
So what do you think would be the next step, or what would you think about next after just have, like, you decide, I'm gonna make an off-road game? What would you do next?
Well, okay, so if we're doing off-road, then I would expect, we're going to have kind of like bumpy terrain, right? So based on that, obviously, like we said, we'd be able to choose cars. So, I mean, I think what I would do specifically next is kind of determine, like, am I going to use real life cars, or am I going to, do my own kind of just like fictional vehicles or what. Um, and I think obviously it's probably easier to go with fictional because like you'd have to worry about licensing for real cars, but obviously a lot of the AAA ones do that anyway. So yeah, I mean personally, I'd probably choose fictional cars and then like design a few that were supposed to be based off of real cars, unless I wanted to go with like something more creative like in the future. But yeah, so I'd choose cars and then work on the implementation of the handling of a singular car, and then add in the customization of stats like handling and top speed, etc.
Hmm. I mean, that's pretty much what makes the cars different, right? I mean, you could just swap the model,
Yeah.
but the important thing is pretty much the stats,
Mhm.
like the turning speed or maximum speed. The model is just what kind of symbolizes the stats
Yeah.
in game. I think one thing when it comes to stats, one thing that you want to keep in mind as well is that speed is probably the most important thing to think about. The reason for me saying this is that a slow racing game is kind of boring because you could react to everything. And where you say, okay, the game's too slow, I can see the corner and I don't need to you don't need to learn the game because you can just react to everything, and so it gets kind of boring.
Yeah.
But if you make the game go too fast, then it might make the player never feel in control, where I bet you know that experience from playing a racing game, and you just go fast and then you crash into the wall on the left, and then you turn to the right and then you crash in the wall on the right, and then you try to get back in the center of the track, and then you crash into the left wall again. And I mean, if it's too fast, then the risk is high that you have that experience where, as a player, you feel just frustrated because you think, okay, I have to steer in that direction, but in the end, it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Or you have some turns where you think, how early am I supposed to brake? Like you need to brake 2 kilometers in advance because the car is so fast, or like the braking is so slow that you really need to plan everything, and you need to be very experienced how everything works. And maybe that's also kind of frustrating if you play the same track for the 50th time and you run into that wall again and again and again. Yeah, and I think that's a matter of speed, of game speed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why, like, kind of like to say like a step 3, like if you kind of choose, I think what I would do is make at least one track, because then based off of that track I can kind of know like what my terrain is going to be like in all of them, or like at least some of them, and then maybe add some additional terrains like later on. But then like design one track that works well with say we only have like one statistic, like set of statistics, or what you'd call a car, I guess, that you drive, and so you have these controls made, and then now you want to test it in a track. So like you make the track before actually worrying about any other cars, and you just kind of have this dummy car. And then you'd be able to kind of test like if you can actually make the turns, and if you can, then if it's actually fun to make those turns, and whatever else would be in the map, then like based off of what kind of terrain you have, then I'd say like, well, now you can kind of tweak stats for cars based off of that. Because yeah, I definitely have had the experience of like running into walls, because like a lot of the realistic ones can be difficult to get used to when you're starting out, because in a game like Forza, a huge part of it is the handling. Like it's not just turn at the right times, it's about like you actually have to be good at driving the car and you have to be smooth at it. So yeah, I mean, making the map and like making sure it works well with the cars is like really important. It's kind of like what the game is made up of.
Yeah, I guess if you do a test track, then you also can just see okay, how steep can a turn be, to maybe make it fun. Let's say you have like an S line curve where you go to the right first and then to the left, and then you need to go to the right again. And if you need to, or if you are able to drive like 300 or let's say just 200 miles an hour, and then but in that curve you need to go down to 20, then maybe people think, okay, that's a bit slow. Like you can just test what pace do you actually like, or what pace is fun to play.
Yeah.
And I think that's, or if you have a game in an arcade style game with driving upside down, then maybe you can also test like, does it actually work, or are there bugs and things like that. Like the first track is probably going to be very complicated, I think. Like you're going to create the basic, the really easy tracks later in the development, because first you need to test everything, kind of what's the limit, and so you have to make a track that pushes the limit, kind of.
Yeah.
At least that's what I think. Yeah. So you have, we set the design, then we created a test car, we created a test track. I guess afterwards it's just adding content, right? I mean, well, if you have direct interaction with other cars where you can bump into each other, then of course you need to also program that and not make it like you bump into other car, your speed goes down to 0.
Yeah.
Without the other car getting like pushed by you. It's like you just ram into a wall and you slow down to complete halt. Of course, then you need to implement these physics and things, but you add more cars, so you have more variety and, of course, more tracks. I think that's kind of the basic plan, right? I mean, racing games as a concept are kind of simple. It's just what you make out of this simple concept, I think.
Yeah, because I mean, and the reason for that, I think, is because, like you said earlier, where like a racing game is kind of about a dot going around a circle, or I guess a track. Like, I mean, that can be fun for like a brief period of time, but like, why play dot go around circle when you could, play something that looks cool, like I don't know, Forza, or I guess now Project Cars is very interesting as well, because so I mean, like, it's kind of the question of like, why play this one? Like, what is it that your game is going to add on so that people are playing it out of fun and not out of pity?
Yeah, exactly. I think one thing to add, if you want to create a simulation racing game, then I think people expect really good graphics nowadays, where because it's a simulation of real life driving, so they want to have cars that look realistic.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take a look at cars in the racing game from the 90s, let's say like Gran Turismo, it was like okay, it's kind of like a square with some windows on like textures, maybe some different shapes, but very simplistic. Not like, oh yeah, sun is shining and so everything is reflecting, like the chassis is reflecting or the mirrors are reflecting the sun and stuff. But I think people kind of expect that today because it's just possible, or there are games that that have those features included.
Yeah, and yeah, like I think I agree with that, with like the simulation ones being like kind of needing to look very good now, because I mean games are kind of being pushed to their limit in that regard. But I think like it doesn't necessarily have to like look realistic. Like if it's not necessarily like a game that's intended to like have realistic cars in terms of like realistic in terms of actual cars that exist. But I mean, maybe it's realistic in terms of physics, or it's like semi-realistic in terms of physics. But then like the developer will obviously play with them to make sure that they're fun. So like there's more focus on fun than there is on realism. There's one game that, since we are talking about graphics, there's one game I haven't played called Distance that's on Steam that I thought looked really interesting. Because it's like, well, they describe it as a futuristic arcade racing game with parkour. And you kind of survive by like doing a bunch of different maneuvers. And that game, like, it doesn't look realistic, but it has kind of a futuristic look with like smooth graphics, for example. So I mean, that's also like something you can go for, depending on like what your game's supposed to be.
Yeah, I think, and if you have a low budget, then you probably go for something arcade style-ish, where you can get away with using like cartoon characters, or maybe you have like cell shading characters that are a bit rough, where you go for a cartoon style that is not that not that detailed as a real life car with everything reflecting and stuff. Like just look at Project Cars and Forza and Gran Turismo, and yeah, then you know, okay, maybe just doing all the physics stuff and lighting might be even more expensive than your whole project budget.
Yeah.
Yeah. Else. Is there anything else you would add that as a developer you might need to keep in mind, or that's important?
I'd say we kind of talked about it, but I'd say like the handling of a car is kind of like, I mean, we've talked about it in earlier episodes too, like if the controls are bad, then the game is bad. And so I mean, like the car should feel like smooth to handle, and it should be very responsive to your movements. And I mean, the reason why a lot of people don't play racing games on a keyboard is because cars don't move like your fingers move on a keyboard. You don't hold down A and to move left. You don't hold down D to move right. So I mean, like in terms of like an analog stick, like a car should move based off of like 0 or between like -1 and 1, for example. If you're using an analog stick, or you know, with a steering wheel, it should follow the steering wheel. So like I think it's like even more intensive with a racing game, because like we said, it's a pretty simple concept, but like your movement is like the main aspect, I think, of a racing game, or like your handling, I should say. So like how the car is able to do like acceleration, turning, just gas, brake, all of that. And then there's so that's the main point. Oh yeah, but I was also gonna say like that part of the game. I mean, if you're testing a car game and then like say you make one car and then and like tweak its stats and then you have its model, driving that thing around in like even an empty map can just be like fun for a little bit. So I mean, because with a racing game, like moving a car, if it's done well, can be a very fun experience. It's just like you're not going to be doing that forever. Like ultimately, you want to use those like good feeling controls to actually do something, which is in this case like going around a lap and competing with other players.
All right, then I don't really have anything to add. I think we talked about quite a lot of racing games already, so I think maybe just do you have a bad example for a racing game?
I don't remember which one, but I've heard a lot of people did not like some of the Need for Speeds. I think one of the Need for Speed games on Xbox 360, I think people said handled poorly.
Underground 2?
I think that was it. Actually, that sounds familiar. I hope I'm not saying this wrong or making things up, but
yeah,
I believe so.
I think I remember people liking Underground, and then Underground 2 was kind of meh. They didn't really like it.
Mm-hmm.
And I give you the king of bad racing games, which is Big Rigs Over the Road Racing, which is really shit.
It actually sounds familiar too. Why is it bad?
The opponent AI doesn't work. Then they released a patch, but you always won because the AI just stopped in front of the goal line, so you could not lose. And if you had a speed limit if you drive forward, but you didn't have a speed limit when driving backward.
Mm-hmm.
So you could, let's say you could go 80 miles driving forward, but you could go 1,500 going backwards, and there were no physics when going uphill. So, or there were no physics at all. You could just drive up the upper hill with 1,000 miles per hour, and it's like just complete trash. So
okay,
you could say it's an alpha where you would need to implement better AI and physics, and so much stuff we talked about that is just absent from that game.
Okay.
Else, I think I haven't played a really, really, really bad racing game that was actually a serious racing game, I would say. Yeah, I can just remember cheating AI on the old NES console, where if you hurt them too much, like you shot them too much, that they just cheat, where they go like 3 times the regular speed and then you just lose. Stuff like that. Yeah. But that's a challenge. It's not cheating. It's just challenging the player. Yeah. Examples for that are Super Off-Road on NES and RC Pro-Am. For cheating AI, at least. I remember those very, very well. They were my childhood. Yeah, they ruined my childhood a bit. Yeah, so else I have nothing else to add. There are so many racing games. Just maybe take a look at the racing games we mentioned. I mentioned Mario Kart series, F-Zero series, Sonic All-Star Racing, Demolition Racer, and Destruction Derby. Those are all arcade. And then simulation, we had Gran Turismo, Forza series, Project Cars. Well, and I guess the Formula One series. I guess those are the popular simulation games that are released consistently, let's say.
Yeah.
All right, then I guess we are done for today. Then thank you for listening again. Thanks for tuning in. This was our episode on the racing game genre, and I hope you liked it. Feel free to comment, and I hope you tune in again next week for episode 24. Then have a nice week, and I guess next episode will be New Year already. So no, this episode is New Year. Happy New Year then.
Indeed.
All right, then have a good 2018. And see you next year. Bye-bye.
Bye.